House of the Dragon is back for an explosive third season, and I have a simple question for you. Who do you want to win? Because there's a moment where Queen Alicent asks the question that has been lurking underneath the whole show. She asks,
"And what of justice? Of temperance, or is strength now to be our only god?"
Now that is a philosophical question, perfect for this channel about what matters and why it matters. And she gets no answer. The show doesn't give us a clear answer either. Philosophers and probably maesters too have been arguing about this for thousands of years, and still there's no definitive answer. But that's where you come in, because your answer to the question, who do you want to win, tells us what you think matters, what you value, your own philosophy even, or what you think is right. So hold on to that for a bit, because even though House of the Dragon is set in a fantasy realm with its own history and knights and kings and queens and, well, dragons, these answers tell us something about ourselves. So let's get into that today, into the philosophies that these characters embody, what that might tell us, and why we should pay attention to the heroes or the monsters that we secretly root for. Yes, House of the Dragon is full of people who think they're right. Rhaenyra thinks she's right. Alicent thinks she's right, at least for most of the series. Daemon, Aegon, Aemond, Corlys, Otto, all of them can explain themselves. They all have claims, scars, loved ones murdered, broken vows, stolen futures, old insides, public humiliations, and private griefs galore. None of them is walking into this catastrophe and thinking, I am the villain of the story. Well, maybe Aemond is, but we'll put him aside for the minute. And here's your spoiler warning too, for the first 2 seasons of the show and the first 3 episodes of season 3. Now, long-time viewers of the channel might remember our video on A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, about a man with nothing in a brutal world holding on to his honour even when it costs him everything. Well, House of the Dragon is that same study, but run in reverse. People with everything, with blood, dragons, crowns, causes, slowly losing their honour and their purpose, one tiny compromise at a time. And I think there are 3 useful ways we can look at the question of what matters, particularly when dealing with this difficult cast of characters. The first is to look at those characters who sincerely believe that what matters is who you are, for good or ill, looking at not just what they claim to be, but what they actually do. Then we can turn to those twisted characters who secretly believe that what matters is who you fight and what that turns them into. And lastly, we can look at the deeper, harder path, those that think that what matters is who you do it all for and who pays the price, whether it be a love, a family, a future, or even the small folk. And at the end, we'll see if this brutal, unflinching show has brought us any closer to understanding what truly matters, plus whether your favourite character has withstood the philosophical trial too. And speaking of the poor small folk, we all know how they end up when the dragons dance above them. But once that battle is over and the ash has settled, as it will be at the end of the series, they'll just have to get on with rebuilding the realm and carrying on. So they could definitely use this. It's the book, The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding Civilization. It's published by Hungry Minds, who are an international creative group of artists, scientists, architects, designers, and entrepreneurs. And they've been kind enough not only to send me a copy of this beautiful volume, but also sponsor this video. But the joke is on them, because I would very much have bought this anyway. You all know how addicted I am to absolutely beautiful books. And here, the book is a luxury coffee table book that is just absolutely packed with handmade illustrations and mind-expanding ideas that I've been enjoying over the past week. I have actually been showing this off to my friends who have been coming around to visit. I'm just particularly smitten with the puzzles and the symbols that run throughout the book. And I have not decoded all of them yet, but there is something deeper going on here. It's a joy to read anyway. And as a philosopher, I can't help myself. I have to find out where all of this stuff leads. Plus, again, the illustrations are just gorgeous. It feels like it's been illuminated by the maesters in the Citadel themselves. So if you are in need of a unique and beautiful gift, or like me, you just love premium books and going down rabbit holes, this one is for you. Check out the QR code on screen, and there's a link below in the description too. Plus, if you use our code PhilobotTen, very special, you get a 10% discount, which is very neat. So thanks again to Hungry Minds and the book The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding Civilization, who made this video possible and who gave me this absolutely beautiful thing. Thank you. But back to our warring banners, because that's where we start, with a virtuous king who could barely climb the steps to his own throne. We have to begin with King Viserys, the root of everything that happens in the series, from being named heir at the Great Council to insisting that, in the end, Rhaenyra would follow him.
King Viserys of House Targaryen!
I will sit the throne today. I said I'm fine. Come on.
I think this is one of the fantastic scenes of the series for me, because half his face is gone. He's dying. Everyone in that room knows that he is dying, and most of them have just basically moved on to what his death is going to mean for them when it happens. And still, he walks one step at a time up a staircase literally made of blades to do the one thing that only a king can do: defend his heir with the full weight of the crown. And when that crown slips, it's Daemon, of all people, who picks it up and who sets it back on his head. Now, the received wisdom about Viserys in the fandom and online, and honestly in Westeros too, is that he is a weak king. A good man, people will concede, but the man who let all of this crazy stuff happen. And I think that's wrong. Plus, I think it's wrong in a way that really matters for my argument here, because that judgment comes from what Viserys seems to be, and almost never from what he actually did. And what did he do? He ruled for 2 decades and kept the peace for nearly all of them, with no wars of ambition, no flying off to melt dawn for glory into the sand, stuff like that, which has plagued Westeros for most of its history. The realm was fed, the lords were managed, and the court's endless rivalries were kept from catching fire. He inherited one of the strongest positions any king of Westeros has ever held, and he felt no need to prove himself with it, which, if you look at the people around him, might be the rarest quality in the whole series. And when the succession question came, he made the hardest political choice available to him. He named his daughter heir against all custom, and then he defended that choice without wavering for the rest of his life. His last act on earth is hauling his dying body up those steps to keep his word. But nobody builds statues to being temperate and judicious, do they? Nobody sings songs about how the harvest came in on time. Good rule is mostly quiet and boring and invisible. It's a long list of catastrophes that never happened. And so a world that really only understands strength looks at 20 years of peace and calls it weakness, calls Viserys weak. He wasn't faultless, of course. He probably trusted Otto Hightower too much for too long. And then there's the deathbed whisper heard by the wrong person that helped launch the very war it was supposed to prevent. But it's interesting too that both of these are failures of trust and of love, not of appetite. Viserys never wanted more than he had, and in this show that makes him practically a unicorn, a good man, and I would argue a good king. And it makes his choice of heir the most interesting decision in the series, because when he looks around his court, what does he see? Almost everyone obsessed with who they are, with blood, with name, with birthright, with what they're owed on account of what they are, rather than anything they've actually done. His brother believes the throne is his by blood. The Hightowers believe it belongs to them because they're the cleverest players at the table. And Rhaenyra, young, untested, reckless as she is, in her Viserys sees at least the promise of something else, of someone who might rule for something beyond herself, for the realm, in his tired, unfashionable sense of the word. Whether she lives up to that bet is a question that the whole series kind of hangs on, and yes, we'll come back to it. But hold on to that distinction. Worth measured by who you are versus worth proven by what you do, because the show has built an entire marriage around it.
The crown was yours.
until those fools at the Great Council plucked it from your head. Is it such a terrible thing for your husband to wish to win it back?
Tonight of all nights, let us lay aside this falsehood. It's not justice for your wife that drives you, it is your own ambition. It is desire for the throne, if not for yourself, then for the scions of your house. I gave up the idea of wearing a crown a generation ago. It is you, Lord Husband, who refuses to abandon this pursuit, even now at the cost of our children.
Corlys Velaryon burns for decades on a single injustice. His wife was passed over for the throne because of what she is. And he's right. The Great Council chose a man over the better claim because she was a woman. But I think we all know what his rage is actually about. It's her blood, her name, her denied title. The wound is real, but he tends to it the way he builds his house as kind of like a big dusty monument. It's another claim, another thing owed because of what somebody is. Whereas Rhaenys does something entirely different with the same wound. Yes, she carries it. She never pretends it doesn't ache a bit, but she then spends decades proving in her own conduct what Westeros lost when it passed her over as queen. She gives the sanest counsel of anyone on either side, usually to people who don't deserve it. She tells truth to power, to Corlys about his ambition, to Rhaenyra about her position, to Daemon about himself, which does take a particular kind of nerve and, yes, strength. And then there's the moment that could have created a dozen different Westeroses. Aegon's coronation, when Rhaenys bursts up through the floor of the Dragon Pit on Meleese, it's all right there in front of her. The entire usurping family on one platform. One word in High Valyrian, and the war is over before it even begins. She has every reason to say it, but she doesn't. Yes, the internet has litigated this scene to death as a plot problem, and to be fair, her escape does kill some small folk. Ordinary people do die so that a queen can make a dramatic exit. And we should hold on to that, because who gets crushed underneath royal decisions is kind of exactly where we're headed in a minute. But as a character moment, that refusal is, I think, the clearest image of restraint in the entire series. She's the one person handed the total, immediate, justified annihilation of her enemies, and she says no. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle had an essential idea about what is going on here, not for the specific moment, but for the pattern, because the pattern is what's going on here. His claim is roughly that true virtue isn't a feeling or a status, and it certainly isn't a birthright. It's a habit. You become just by doing just things, and you become good by doing good things. You become wise by doing wise things over and over until the doing is simply who you are, which is why Rhaenys can refuse in the Dragon Pit. It isn't a decision that she makes on the spot. It's a muscle that she's been training her whole life, and it holds all the way to Rook's Rest, where she dies fighting for a side she chose on judgment rather than on blood. Corlys wanted the realm to remember who his wife was, but Rhaenys spent a lifetime showing the realm what she did. The queen who never was is the queen who always did. So yes, big fan of Rhaenys here, for the most philosophical of reasons. And if you'd like more philosophy and culture, then please give us a like and a subscribe and a hype. It really helps the channel. But shameless plugging aside, what about everybody else? Because once you're watching what people do, rather than what they claim, the gap between the two is where almost all the rest of the cast lives. I mean, like, Alicent believes she's duty itself incarnate, though she seems to enjoy herself a fair bit and gets what she wants along the way. Aegon wants to be loved, and there he is before he's a usurper or a drunk or a king. He's a damaged son, asking his mother the only question that matters to him, not quite getting an answer to it. So what does he practice instead? Things like appetite, cruelty, being feared where he can't be loved, which leaves the man you've all been waiting for me to mention. Daemon is the show's purest case of a man in love with who he is. With the blood of the dragon, with Dark Sister on his hip, he's the rogue prince who should have been king. His entire self is basically a title, and entitled to boot. And what I love about the show is what it does with him in season 2. It locks him in a haunted castle and makes him negotiate with himself. Harrenhal strips away his whole audience, the dragons, the war, and what's left is a man who's basically being interrogated by his own ghosts, by the brother he mocked, the wife he ignored, even the boy whose murder he arranged. Alice Rivers and the ghosts of Harrenhal don't torture him with lies, they torture him with the truth. And what comes out the other side is a remarkable turn in the series. The show's most dangerous free agent walking out of that cursed castle and kneeling to Rhaenyra. Now, whether it lasts, whether anything of Daemon's strange impulses lasts, that's an open question for the show to answer. But for one moment, his practice has changed. And by Aristotle's arguments, that's the place that change really counts. So that, for me, is the first test of who should rule Westeros. Not what they say, or what they're called, or what is theirs by right, but what they do. It's a test, of course, that we can apply in our own lives too. That's probably what Aristotle intended it for, and not for analysing a fictional realm millennia later. But it is a really useful lens, becoming, by doing, to have for others, and especially for ourselves. But a character isn't formed in a vacuum. We're shaped, more than we'd ever like to admit, by what we set ourselves against. And in the House of the Dragon, the enemy is never just a rival or an army. The enemy becomes a mirror. And what do we become when we fight dragons? So Criston Cole gives us his answer, exhausted, somewhere on the endless march with Gwaine Hightower.
Or perhaps all men are corrupt, and true honour is a mist that melts in the morning.
That is a bleak philosophy.
I have no philosophy. Or rather, my philosophy was this: to protect the righteous and dispense justice on the rest. But now, you saw what I saw. The dragons dance, and men are like dust under their feet. And all our fine thoughts, all our endeavours are as nothing. We march now toward our annihilation. To die will be a kind of relief. Don't you think?
It's wonderful, and this for me is a whole play in and of itself. Westeros's version of Beckett, waiting for Aemond. It's two tired knights on a road, and one of them has just given up on the entire moral universe. Now, I think Cole is one of the most philosophically interesting characters in the show, and it's because he isn't simply a hypocrite. He's something far more dangerous than that, I think. He's a failed idealist. Because this is a man who once believed in things completely, in his vows, in the white cloak, in the sacred line between what a knight is and what a man wants. And then he crossed that line with the heir to the throne of all people and discovered that he could not uncross it, and rather live with the plain, painful fact that he has failed his own ideals. He spent every year since remaking the world so that the ideals that he used to hold were the lie. And you can see the appeal of it, can't you? If all men are corrupt, then his corruption was never really a fall because there was nowhere to fall from. If honour is just, as he says, a mist that melts in the morning, then the vow that he broke was never solid in the first place. If the dragons dance and all our fine thoughts are as nothing, then the only honest thing left is to be hard and useful and obedient and do whatever it takes to whoever holds the biggest dragon. Every clause of his bleak philosophy has a kind of job to do, and that job is making Sir Criston Cole innocent. In philosophy, we call this nihilism. And that's usually how nihilism shows up too, by the way. It's rarely some wild-eyed declaration that nothing matters from a prophet or something. Far more often, it's disappointed idealism, trying to survive its own collapse. It's a wounded believer deciding that the belief itself was the mistake, was the wound. And the trap is that it always sounds like maturity. Cynicism always sounds like being the grown-up in the room because it presents itself as whatever's left after the illusions burn away. Which is kind of why Gwaine Hightower's answer, that this is a bleak philosophy, sounds almost feeble and unrealistic next to it. He doesn't refute Cole, he just declines to be recruited into that nihilism. And yes, wherever nihilism appears, a certain Friedrich Nietzsche quote is sure to follow. You know the one. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. And when you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. It's hard to avoid here because House of the Dragon has practically adopted this as its house motto. They terrorize, so we terrorize. They burn, so we burn. They take our sun, so we take their sun. But I think Nietzsche and the show are after something deeper than just a geopolitical tit for tat. And Nietzsche's later works follows through this idea all the way down. The real danger isn't that we copy the enemy's tactics. It's that the enemy starts to organize our entire moral imagination. You begin by opposing them. Then you define yourself by opposing them. Then every choice gets measured against them, what they'd do, what they'd exploit, what they'd read as weakness, until, without ever switching sides, you've handed them the authorship of your own being. Nietzsche's word for the engine underneath all of this is ressentiment, the wounded self, building a whole moral universe around its wound, until the wound becomes proof of its own righteousness. You stop asking what kind of person you should be, and you let the enemy decide for you. And there's an even darker turn here, one that the show is brilliant at illustrating, because once your wound is your righteousness, you need the enemy. You need them to stay monstrous because their monstrosity is what is holding your self-image together. If Rhaenyra is merely a complicated woman who wronged him, then Criston Cole has to face what he is. So Rhaenyra can't be complicated. She has to be corruption itself incarnate. If Rhaenyra has any shred of a claim, then Alicent has to face what all of her sacrifices have actually served and done. So Rhaenyra has to be a danger to the realm. And it runs the other way too. If Alicent is a used, cornered, frightened woman rather than a scheming usurper, then Rhaenyra has to reckon with the partial truth on the other side too. So Alicent has to be for her the betrayal in the green dress. Everyone in the dance can see the other side's self-deception with perfect clarity, but their own is invisible to them because their own is holding them together. And I know some people have bemoaned the later scenes between Alicent and Rhaenyra, but to me they're kind of essential. They're the rare moments where these two have to face what the enemy actually is in human terms, rather than what they need them to be. And if you want to know where this road ends, the cycles of fear and the monstrous tit-for-tat, the show gives us two houses who've been walking it for 1,000 years. Not the Targaryens, worse, the Brackens and the Blackwoods.
You should know that a substantial number of those swords have now declared and are presently at war. Houses Bracken and Blackwood have long detested one another.
Why?
Oh, well. The answer to that is lost in time. Sin begets sin, begets sin.
They've hated each other since before the Targaryens, before the Andals, since more or less the dawn of time, depending on who you ask. Nobody living in that world can tell you what started it. The original cause is just rotted away entirely, and the hatred just stands on its own now. It's self-sustaining, it's inherited like the lands themselves. And when the dance comes, they don't really choose sides over Rhaenyra or Aegon. Each house signs up mostly because the other one signed up on the opposite side. The Civil War is just fresh banners for an old appetite. And in the book, Martin gives their first battle a detail so perfect it reads like a parable. At the Burning Mill, the fight ends with the Blackwood heir and the Bracken knight killing each other simultaneously. Neither side can even claim to be a victor. It's just two men dead in the same instant over a quarrel whose cause died centuries before either of them was born. Sin begets sin begets sin, and then the next generation inherits the lands, the titles, and the obligation to keep the wound open. You're born into the fight long before you're old enough to ask what the fight is making of you. And by Aristotle's lights from our previous part, these houses have been practicing hatred for so long that it isn't even a feeling anymore. It's their habit. It's their character. It's their family trait. So that, I think, is the shape of the second answer, and I find it scarier than any dragon because nothing in it requires evil intent. It only requires a wound, an enemy, and time. As Cole says,
Look around you, Simone. Look to the sky, to the horizon. Doom and ruin surround us. We will all become beasts before our end.
Only if we abandon our principles.
But Gawain refuses. He refuses the claim that this is just how the world is. And we've seen this exact fork in the road on this channel before. Dunk, centuries later, a humble hedge knight in the same world, still being torn apart by the same old civil wars, reaches the opposite verdict to Sir Kristen Cole. Cole looks at the world where honour fails and concludes that honour has always been a lie, whereas Dunk looks at the same world and he keeps practicing honour anyway, precisely because nothing out there will do it for him. It's the same diagnosis of the world, but the opposite answer about the self. One of them still owns his character. The other one handed his over to his enemies years ago. So choose your enemies carefully. Maybe even refuse to have one at all. Because nobody ever admits that the fight has hollowed them out, that they become the abyss. They say the thing that keeps them going, the thing that makes it all bearable, the thing that every monster in this show says while becoming one. They say they're doing it for someone else. Ah yes, that tricky little preposition for, which immediately moves the focus from the selfish speaker to something else. What struck me this time rewatching House of the Dragon in preparation for the latest season is that for is kind of a ladder in the show, and the characters spent seasons climbing it. They say it's for myself, and then for my family, for the dead, for the realm, for the future. And you'll notice that with every rung they climb, the cause sounds even more noble, doesn't it? A man who fights for himself is a brute, but a man who fights for his family is loyal, and if it's for the dead, well, then he's devoted, and by the time he's fighting for the future, he sounds like practically a saint. But something else changes as you climb that ladder, and it kind of changes in the wrong direction, because each rung up, the person you're supposedly serving is less able to answer you back. And a cause that can't answer you back can't tell you when to stop. The bottom rung is at least honest about its dishonesty because it's doing it for yourself while calling it something else. You know, Aegon wants love, Aemon wants respect, Daemon wants recognition. And so much of what looks like politics in this show is really just a private hunger that these people have that's wearing a kind of public armour to justify it. But climb up a rung and the cause becomes family, or even higher than that, a name.
History does not remember blood. It remembers names.
It's a magnificent line, and I think there's a dirty trick at the core of it. Because blood is the living thing. It's the son or the daughter or the person who can bleed and who can object to what you're doing. Whereas a name is an abstraction. And an abstraction can't cry. It can't sit across the table from you and ask why your ambition keeps needing more from it. And Corlys loves his family. He truly does, which makes him tragic rather than villainous. But the show keeps presenting him with the bill, with a daughter into marriage and a son in a coffin and a wife into war, and he never quite manages to connect the cost he's paying to the folly he's building. Otto Hightower does much the same thing, and he does seem to love his family in his limited strategic spreadsheet-shaped kind of way. But here's the thing about family. Family can still argue with you at the dinner table. But what happens if we climb past them to a higher rung of the cause? What if we do it for the dead?
The boys who clung to me, who hid their little faces in my skirts, dead, so that I may sit upon a throne of swords.
Will you let them die in vain?
It's another great moment in the show where, for once, Rhaenyra almost sees the war's arithmetic, that children are dead so that she can sit on a stupid chair, and she almost sees her way out of it. And then one sentence just drags her back. Will you let them die in vain? And that sounds like devotion, doesn't it? But it takes her terrible loss and it converts it into an obligation. And then that obligation quietly becomes permission. We've already lost so much, the logic runs, and therefore we have to keep going. It's like a sunk cost fallacy in a funeral form. And the trouble is that the dead, unlike the family at the table, the blood, they can't decline that honour. They say nothing at all. No character in the show seems to realise that the dead demand absolutely nothing from them because, well, they're gone. So the living end up speaking for them. And somehow, whenever the living speak for the dead turn out to be enthusiastically in favour of whatever the living have already decided they wanted to do. And then we go up another rung for the realm.
There is no power but what the people allow you to take.
Every lord in this show says the realm, and they mean like either the map they're poring over or that giant table at Dragonstone, which I believe from the books we find out Aegon the Conqueror himself commissioned, and it's still there in Game of Thrones, so that's one durable table. But anyway, when a lowborn character like Mysaria says for the realm, she means something else entirely, and honestly, something we don't fully see proven until much, much later, until in Robert's Rebellion. And after that, because her idea is that power doesn't only descend from crowns and bloodlines, it also rises from harvests and garrisons and city gates that somebody, some actual person, has chosen to open. And when King's Landing starves and the mob finally turns, that's her theory of power being demonstrated in the streets. It's a strikingly modern political philosophy when you think about it. And then at the very top of the ladder, there's the story itself. The Song of Ice and Fire, the secret passed from king to heir, the belief that all of this serves a war that we know is centuries away. It's the noblest cause in the show. It's the most writerly cause in the show. So, of course, George R.R. Martin and the showrunners love it. But I'd say it's also the most dangerous one, because its beneficiary doesn't even exist yet. It's the effective altruism of Westeros, White Walker edition. But the problem with that is that it's the future. It can't tell you that that's too much. It can't tell you, not this child, and it can't tell you to stop. It makes for the perfect cause to justify anything, because it's infinitely important, it's permanently silent, and it's always conveniently on your side. A cause as big as the Song of Ice and Fire can justify more or less anything, and it answers to no one. So that's the ladder, and there's one question still standing at the top of it. Who pays the price? And the answer is pretty much always the small folk, isn't it? I mean, the big characters, they pay too, sure, but it's mostly that they're the ones doing the choosing as well. They kind of bring it upon themselves. They're the players of the game. But the real brunt of all of this falls on the people at the edge of the frame, all those extras, really, the ordinary people that the show kind of lets us glimpse everywhere, but never quite looks at. And this is where I want to bring in a really interesting philosopher, Simone Weil, a French philosopher who you would absolutely not expect to turn up in Westeros. She wrote one of the great essays of the 20th century about Homer's Iliad, of all things, and it fits into this discussion better than you might think. Because while Game of Thrones was inspired by the Wars of the Roses in ye olde England, House of the Dragon to me always felt closer to the Iliad, or something like that, with all of its hubris and its nemesis and its tragedy. And war's true subject, Weil wrote in that essay, in the shadow of the Second World War, is force, which she defined as what turns a person into a thing. Its endpoint is that literal, since a corpse is about as thing-like as a person can become. But most of Force's everyday work of turning people into things is a little subtler than that. You know, it's the soldier that becomes a unit to be spent, or the child that becomes an heir or a replacement. All of them kind of moved around like pieces on a board. And everybody's still breathing, but they've already become objects in somebody else's plans. And Weil's deeper claim, the one the whole video it's kind of been built around because I've been thinking about it for a while, is that Force turns its wielder into a thing as well. It captures the person using it too, because nobody really ever possesses Force. Whoever deals it also gets hollowed out by it, like Sir Criston, until they're becoming an instrument of the very thing that they thought that they were using. Aemon and Daemon at their worst are indistinguishable from the carnage they inflict. They're almost used and damaged by it too. And for me, one of the most horrifying scenes in the whole series is the sowing of the dragon seeds. Ordinary people who are incinerated one after the other because Rhaenyra needs more riders on the board, more pieces, more assets. And who they actually are doesn't really matter to anybody watching from the gallery. But Weil also offers us a way out here too, and she gives it a lovely, unglamorous name. It's attention. It's the thing that the whole internet has been stealing from you all of this time. It literally is attention. It's really seeing another human being. She said, really seeing another human being is the rarest and purest form of generosity. And with that one word, generosity, you can sort this whole cast of characters out, because the characters that are worth anything are the ones that precisely can still see the people inside the abstractions that they may be fighting for. It's Rhaenys counselling actual people rather than coveting positions. It's Elena seeing her son and not the argument that his body makes that's useful. It's Hugh the blacksmith dragonseed seeing his sick daughter. It's Mysaria seeing the people in the city, and Alicent in those late scenes with Rhaenyra trying, clumsily and far too late, to see the girl inside her enemy that she used to know. Force keeps turning people into things, particularly in the show, and attention keeps turning them back into people. And almost everything else in the show is just the noise that those two make when they collide. So here's the final test for me, and I think it's the only rung of the ladder that really matters and that holds. The only for that doesn't end in like ash. It's for the living. For the people who can still object and refuse and tell you to stop. Because the moment your cause can no longer be argued with by the people paying for it, then you're back at that Nietzschean moment. That's the moment with the monster in it. And if you want proof that this is where the whole saga was heading, look at how the story ends. Game of Thrones hands the throne to Bran the Broken. And yes, I know half of you just groan and nobody's defending the pacing of those final seasons. But look past all of that execution to the choice itself, because the final answer to who should rule turns out to be the one person left who isn't invested in who he is, who never let the thing he fought against capture him, and who rules very simply for the living. After all the fire, the wheel stops somewhere close to one of my favourite philosophers, Albert Camus, with a figure who has given up the consolations of legacy and destiny and who simply attends to the living, because they're the real people and because they deserve his attention and they deserve dignity. After all the dragons, the realm's last defense turns out to be something almost embarrassingly small, the ability to look at another person and actually see them. So, who do you want to win? I asked you that at the start, and I promised you my answer, and here it is in the spirit of full disclosure. My favourite character in the House of the Dragon is Ulf. I'm sorry, he's just fun. Every scene he's in gets better the moment he starts talking, mostly because everybody else wants him to shut up. He is the David Brent of Westeros, or at least the character David Brent would wish himself to be. He's funny, he's popular, he's important, he's a man about the town. But we've all seen what happens when you put David Brent in charge of even a paper office in Slough, so handing him the Seven Kingdoms seems, on the balance, pretty unwise. Yes, my choice, my favourite, is not a good one, which is the point, really, because who we like and who should win are very different questions, and the show is kind of counting on us to confuse them. We root for charisma or for damage or for cheekbones or for the best scene last week and who got out on top. That's fine, that's watching television. But notice what happens when you run the favourites through those three tests instead. Who are you? Not your claim, but your habits. Who are you becoming? Or who is the enemy making you? And who pays for the thing that you say you're doing it for? Can they still object? Or have you climbed past everyone who could tell you to stop? If we run the whole cast through those simple tests, the results are pretty humbling. It seems like almost no one passes. Almost. Because for me, the character who passes all three of those tests is sadly already dead. Rhaenys held her habits for a lifetime. She never let her wounds or her enemies define her, and she answered to the living all the way down, and the show killed her mid-battle in a war she counselled against for a side that she chose on judgment rather than on blood, and the rest of Westeros barely even noticed. It's not sloppy writing. I think it's exactly what I've been arguing. Because here's the terrible wisdom in the end. The show has never once argued that monsters do or don't exist. It argues something worse, that there are no born monsters, that they are slowly grown and that they come to justify themselves in all of the terms that we've just laid out, that they stop listening and paying attention, as Simone Weil counselled. I started out with Alison's question, but it really answers itself. Many things matter. And what matters varies from context to context. Some philosophers have elevated one idea or two above the others, but they're really all important. Alison's point, I think whether she knew it or not, is that the worship of one end over all the others is really just a rotten rung on the ladder to stand on, a single banner to say that this is me and to justify it, when a realm is composed of many banners and of the people beneath them. So House of the Dragon is fun. It's full of ideas and we can apply philosophy to them, even Aristotle. But its ultimate point is about politics, about thinking of everything in terms of the most based politics, realism, and slowly reducing ourselves by that thinking into the base, the beasts, the monsters that play by those realist rules. Many who do that are disappointed idealists, like Sir Christian Cole, or feel that they have no choice, like Alicent, or they find fear the easy path to manipulate people, like Aemond, or a dozen other justifications. But ultimately, that kind of philosophy, that realism and its approach to the world, it beggars us all. And that's why I keep coming back to philosophers like Camus, like Weil, like Aristotle, and characters like Rhaenys. They remind us of the choice and of the ability to live and be otherwise. And I think that's why George R.R. Martin keeps coming back to the small folk too, and those warm moments, those acts of kindness. His head may live in the never-ending twists and turns of the Song of Ice and Fire, but I suspect that his heart lives in the smaller stories, like A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. But that's all for Philosophical TV Club for now. So until next time, be wise and be kind, and remember...
Men would have to show me respect because of the big fucking dragon.
Oh.